Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anastasia Mylona. I'm the head of research here at CIBSE. Thank you all for signing up to this webinar. I hope you find it useful. The program is quite simple, really. Dr. Sungmin Hong from UCL is going to give you the background of the development of the tool. I'm going to do a live demonstration of the tool, and then we will respond to any questions you might have. It might be useful at this point to mention that you can submit through the system your questions all through the webinar, but we will start responding to them once the live demonstration is finished. So I will just spend very few minutes saying that for those of you that are familiar with the CIBSE energy benchmarks, traditionally we printed them in Guide F, chapter 20. They look a bit like that. It's basically a list with the good practice, typical practice of electricity and fossil fuel for heating demand for different types of buildings. When we thought about revising what we have at the moment, we thought we need to have something much more dynamic, something that we can renew much more frequently, and based on the information that becomes available for different types of buildings. So we started thinking and scoping out this kind of an online tool that will offer CIBSE members and the industry something that reflects technological advances and advances in our industry. So this is kind of summarizes the aim of the tool. This was a collaboration between CIBSE and UCL. UCL did all the research and development of the benchmarks. Sungmin is going to talk to you about the current benchmarks, but also what we are hoping to achieve with future development of the tool. So I'm going to pass you on to Dr. Sungmin Hong to talk to you about the tool.
Hi everyone, my name is Sungmin Hong. I'm a lecturer at UCL's Institute for joining us for the webinar. I'll briefly start by briefly introducing what we've been doing in the past few years, just to let you know what we're up to nowadays. So over the past 7 or 8 years, we've been constantly analyzing energy data from both public and private sector buildings in the UK, mostly in England, but we've also worked on some buildings in Scotland as well. And what we've noticed from our work was that recent data tended to show a different patterns of energy use in comparison to existing historical energy benchmarks. So, for example, offices and schools in certain circumstances tended to be more electrically intensive, whilst being less intensive in demand for heating. And this was a pattern we've started seeing across various building types, which suggested that perhaps existing benchmarks were not representing how energy is being used by buildings nowadays effectively. Analyzing energy data over a longer period also suggested that the pattern continues to change, and that it's likely to change in the future as well, which is perhaps why energy benchmarks go out of date as it did so far. So based on this experience, we were able to identify a few opportunities and some challenges that were the key drivers for suggesting and collaborating with the CIBSE to develop the tool. So the first point refers to the fact that benchmarks are often static in the sense that they don't, it's quite difficult to update the benchmarks, or it was quite difficult to update the benchmarks. Either it's because of lack of data, or the lack of sort of mechanism to do so. Whereas what we're hoping to do, given that there is enough data nowadays, is to make it more dynamic, make the benchmarking more accessible to a wider range of users, rather than just being limiting to consultants, let's say, who has the right background to understand them. The second point refers to the abundance of data, but also the fact that there is enough data, well, there is increasingly more data becoming available that describe buildings' attributes that determine demands for energy use, on which we could provide benchmarks that are more relevant to individual circumstances of buildings, rather than have a sort of static absolute benchmark as we did before, which sits within the CIBSE's website at the moment. So backend was developed by UCL, which included scoping out the possible avenues for sourcing data, but also developing a database to store them, and also plan for any future data that could become available to us, so that we can include them and use them for reviewing and updating benchmarks. And the second phase of that part was to develop a processing engine, which will send a query to the database, select the data, and process the data so that they become normalized, filtered, and then the processing engine would send the benchmark data to the front end, which will be presented to the users to their demand. The data we've used for this initial version of the tool is primarily from Display Energy Certificate Scheme, which was collected between 2008 and 2012. This data set was, included records from around 46,000 public sector buildings, which was the biggest of its kind at that time. Before analyzing the data, we have gone through an extensive data cleaning process, which is reported in a report that we produced for the CIBSE's Benchmarking Steering Committee back in 2013. If any of you are interested in how we've done this, you're welcome to go and download the report from the landing page, as it's shown on the screen down here on the right-hand side. After the cleaning, we've prepared the data over a few more steps, just to make sure that we're reflecting the latest patterns of energy use as much as possible. So, for example, selecting only the records from the last 3 years of that period. And for those buildings who have more than one record, we've decided to go for the latest record of what's available, and to take into account the influence of variation in seasonal and regional weather. Parts of, or proportions of fossil thermal energy use index or intensity were corrected to 2021 heating degree days, which is considered to be the UK's average climate. And for this initial phase, we've decided to choose building types, not building categories, building types that had a sample size of more than 50. Classification plays an important role as well when it comes to benchmarking. And because CIBSE Guide F provides benchmarks at higher resolution, we've decided to use the Guide F's classification as a starting point. It's a two-tiered system to help users navigate. So as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see this sort of classifications at group level of activities that are similar in nature. So for example, you'll have a group for entertainment activities, you'll have further and higher education related activities, you'll have a grouping for schools. So these three would be the higher level classification you'll see when you navigate first. And then once you select one of these categories, you'll then get access to the sub classification, which will lead you to benchmarks that you're looking for. Another thing you'll notice when you try out the tool is that many of the benchmarks will be simply transferred from CIBSE Guide F to the tool. That's basic because we don't have the data for these activities. And also, it's one of the key philosophies that we have towards the tool, which is to be transparent. So where there isn't, we don't have data, we'll try to source benchmarks based on existing documents or publications. Where we do have data, we'll make sure we clearly state where the data comes from, how the data was processed, so that users can be aware of the circumstances of each of the benchmarks. So after the backend, there's the front end, which you'll see soon. As you may have noticed, it's a beta version. It's the first time the tool has been released to such a wide user base. So what we're hoping to do is collect feedback from anyone who's interested in the tool. So please feel free to share your experience with us. Give us some suggestions if you have any. If something doesn't work, please let us know as well, so that we can review and update the tool as we go. So that's for first phase. And the second phase, which is ongoing at the moment, will focus on engaging users. So the first type of users we're hoping to engage are industry professionals, so consultants or people who need to use benchmarks. And one line of development we're taking at the moment is to liaise with a developer of dynamic simulation modeling software to embed the tool within the modeling environment so that whenever a building is modeled, the performance from the model can be compared straight directly with the benchmarks without having to manually search the internet. The second type of users we're interested in engaging with are the stakeholders who generate data or manage data. And through exploring the concept of gamification, we're hoping that the users will share their data with us so that we can provide more reliable and relevant benchmarks for the sort of public use. And to make this happen, we're currently developing the tools sort of backend and front end to allow data from users to be imported. And by doing so, we're hoping that users will upload the consumption figures from a building they're managing or designing, or a portfolio that they're managing at the moment, so that they can be compared to buildings or similar buildings in the database as well. And we're also hoping to implement a sort of GIS interface, which could visualize where your buildings are within on a map, so that you can visually inspect and compare buildings to your needs. Following that, there's the gamification phase, where we'll aim to introduce a social function so that professionals can not only network with others in a similar situation, share their success stories, ask for help if they need any. Also, we'll gamify it in the sense that individuals who manage the data could exemplify their competence as well. And by doing so, we're hoping that we'll continue to gather data from across public and commercial sectors, which we will then use to continuously renew and update the benchmarks as we move along. Before we end the presentation, I just wanted to give you an an update on where we are in terms of the progress and what we're planning at the moment. So phase 1 and phase 2, they're being run in parallel. And the beta version of phase 1 has been completed. And what we're hoping to do is review and update the tool and launch version 1 once we have enough feedback from users. And what's important about this tool is that we consider it as a live platform, which means we'll continue to review not just the benchmarks, but also the tool so that it becomes more and more useful. And phase 2, we've started the development of the user input function, but it will shortly be followed by our research, which focuses on understanding the data landscape and the individuals within the commercial sector in order to develop and implement the social function for the tool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seung-min. I'm going now to show you the landing page. Sorry. So the tool sits under the knowledge tab on our CIBSE website, and you can see here on the left-hand side at the bottom, Energy Benchmarking 2 beta version. So once you clicked here, you get on this page where it gives you a little bit of information about the tool, including how you can access to it. If you are a member or you have used the website before, then you probably have login details. If you're using it for the first time to access the tool, then you will need to put some very basic information about who you are, your email, your job title, and then you can get access to the tool for free. If you want to have a look at it before you decide if you want to register with the website, there is this image that can give you an overview of the different features of the tool, what you get once you have logged in. Here you can actually click on it and get access to the tool. We have a list of the features, and then we have at the bottom some useful references. We thought people that would like to know more about how these benchmarks are being developed, then they can get access to all these, again, free resources that you can click and be transferred to read more. So once you clicked on the link, you get into this very, very simple interface. As Seung-min mentioned before, you have to choose the type of building you're interested in. I'm going to go with schools because I know that we have a really good sample. And then, let's say primary school. Let's hope it's not too, okay. So you get this cumulative distribution visualization that gives you the five different percentile points on including the good practice and the typical practice. So you get the 10th, 25th, 50th, which is the typical practice, 75th and 90th. So you get more information than you would get from Guide F. And you get the option between electricity and fossil, which is your gas target. Sorry, this might take a little bit of time. We also, while we're waiting, we also have different, we have the national benchmarks, which is similar to the Guide F, but because we had quite a lot of information, especially for the types of buildings that we had samples, we could actually produce regional data as well. Apologies for that. It's because a lot of people are using it at this point. We get a little bit of oop. Okay. So I'm going to show you here. So we have the national benchmarks, and if I click the geographical region, it gives me an option of the different regions in the UK. Just going to choose. Okay, the graph is coming hopefully. So just for people that are used to using GuideF, we also have this table at the bottom of the graph to present the benchmarks the way are also presented at the in GuideF. So here you can see the electricity of this kind of building for the Greater London. The other feature that we thought it might be something useful for users, that you can actually put, if you know your total energy demand, electricity or gas, you can actually put it here. So let's say it's 50, and then it position it on the graph. It's an early feature, very simple feature that we are hoping to develop further with much more kind of information, input, output information, so that you can use it to when you're managing your portfolio, if you're an energy manager, or if you are designing a portfolio of buildings, to look at the targets, at your targets that you'd like to follow. So so this is the tool. It's very simple at the moment. The graph doesn't exist, as Sungmin mentioned earlier, it doesn't exist for all the type of buildings. If you go back to the landing page, we thought it would be useful to summarize here the new the revised energy benchmarks. We are hoping, this is an ongoing project, and we are hoping to get access to more databases that hopefully will give us the opportunity to develop better energy benchmarks for as many building types as possible.